I'm going to give you an overview of the promontory forts that we've been examining during the Cherish project and their trying to paint their maritime significance. I'll be predominantly focused on the Irish sites, but I do want to reference the sea links and the links across the sea, the Irish Sea as part of the Cherish project to our Welsh partners and even further afield. The Cherish project is a multidisciplinary project applying innovative techniques in archaeology and surveying to monitor our changing coastlines and their heritage. We work with, I'm based in the Discovery Programme in Dublin, but we also work with the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales and their neighbours, the Aberystwyth University, in the paleoenvironment of the changing environments and climate change, and we also work with the Geological Survey of Ireland, and we're surveying the seabed and the geology of the coast. So the Cherish project is an acronym. Cherish means Climate, Heritage and Environments of Reefs, Islands and Headlands. We're looking at the historic climate and weather and telling that what's happened, and the project has come around because of the because of climate change, and when the funding comes through through the European Union Wales Island Programme. And so we want to improve the knowledge among the sea communities around the Irish Sea. And we're doing that by involving the heritage and the erosion of our heritage. So we have several case study areas around Ireland. The number one there is in the Dublin area, and we have two areas in Wexford, and number four is Waterford, and then on the west coast of Ireland there we have the Dingle and Evora peninsulas. And the Welsh side have similar areas that they are study areas. They're slightly smaller in area because of they've done previous area surveys to narrow down their case study areas. Just some examples before I move on to look at the promontory forts themselves that we'll be discussing more in this project. There's some examples that we're not just looking at the forts. Here's the Rosslare Fort at the entrance to Wexford Harbour, and this was certainly was recorded as a fort down in the Cromwellian times. But during the 1920s, storms and the coastal erosion removed the town, and the town and village had to be abandoned. It was a Coast Guard station at the time, and so an associated village. We've been recorded today. You can only find it on a sandbank. It's inaccessible from the land. It appears certainly developments within the harbour of land reclamation, and probably the building of Rosslare Harbour itself may have affected sediment and reducing sediment to the site and longshore drift. So it was eroded away. So we're monitoring. And another extreme example from the west coast of Ireland is the Sunbeam wreck in 1906 schooner, and there's been certainly over the last 10 years this has been moving around the beach. So when we started the Cherish project there in 2017. We saw it on the beach there, probably in the middle of Ross Bay Beach, but we certainly, when we couldn't find it later on after the storms in 2017. So it was into 2018 that we only later in that year did we actually find it again, about 3 kilometres further along the beach, and only half of it that we've been able to find so far. So we're looking at how the climate change is affecting the promontory forts as we survey this coast. They seem to be quite a common feature, so that's why I'm going to concentrate them today in this talk. Well, what is a promontory fort? A promontory, well, it's a promontory that's been cut off by a bank and a ditch on its landward side. And as you can see, the examples here from Woodstown in the Waterford area of Ireland, and then another example in the from Kerry at Dunbeg. Both these are under a lot of erosion, and we can see certainly the banks. There's earthen banks here, more common in the Waterford area, and they do get them here, but over in Kerry as well. There's even 4 of these banks and ditches as you approach a stone bank and a stone hut, which is very similar to to what we find in the beehive huts of Skelly Michael, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, which can be seen from Dunbeg itself, overlooking Dingle Harbour. So it seems to be, as we get more multiple earthworks and walls, these forts, they probably were more important. You don't normally just get one. There's two there, two banks certainly at Woodstown, and there's at least five in Dunbeg. So we're seeing a more important site. There are some. We look. These kind of seems to be dominating the sea, as we can see overlooking the shore. But then there are other examples, such as the tidal island in Michael's Mount near Maritime in Cornwall. It would also kind of dominate the seaways and the landing places. And other sites which are very associated with promontory forts are hill forts, but normally find slightly more inland. This is the example of Dinas Dinil on the right there. That's the entrance to near the entrance to the Menai Straits in the north coast of Wales, and you can see the erosion along the side there. It was only last year that Cherish was excavating there, and we find Roman materials and a stone hut within the sand within the centre of that hill fort. So that's the hill fort is. So they were both the tidal island and the hill fort, almost kind of same kind of use. They're kind of monitoring the sea lanes as well as promontory forts, and in those coastal areas. But what's mostly going to concentrate on this talk is the promontories themselves, the more straightforward promontory forts themselves. So there seems to be, mostly they seem to be Iron Age to early medieval that we're getting in our dates, but there does seem to be in some cases a reuse of the forts. This is Ferreter's castle. Well, we were planning to excavate this year, but hopefully we can go do some excavation next year. This has a 15th to 16th century tower house built above the earlier fort, or on the earlier fort, and so you can see it's being reused, perhaps with more wealth coming from the Americas during this post-medieval period. So yeah, well, one of the forts that certainly has been making the news a lot recently from the erosion is Dunbeg. That's the small fort there over in Kerry. This has been popular certainly for people touring around Dingle. So it's a site to visit with its stone bank and the hut as well, and they're looking over the Dingle Bay, the views. So it's been recorded for a long time from antiquarians. The black and white image in the bottom left by the geologist de Dunoyer in the 1850s shows the entrance to the fort at this time, and we can see that when we compare that to today, you can see how much erosion has occurred in the image just to the right. With the OPW have had to build a fence to stop the tourists kind of approaching that area due to the danger of erosion. And then the images over to the, we can see during the time that we are recording it as well, you can see the entrance there has even collapsed between April 2018 and April 2019, but the lintel has fallen in. And so we can see the earth and bank are all in section as this collapse, the earth and bank and the stone bank here and the hut on the top left. And as it looks today, because it takes much more crescent shaped as we flew the drone over it. But here you can see when it's when you compare it to Dunoyer's sketch back in the 1850s, it was a much more triangular shape. So this is when we kind of compare back to over 1,000 years ago when this fort was inhabited. We were seeing that whatever people that used it, that they would have had a much more different experience of how they would have seen it and lived in it than we see when tourists and us visit it today. So why are these forts important? Well, why are we recording them? Well, they're particularly vulnerable to erosion. We don't know how many we've lost so far, but we can see how much they are eroding. Here's an example from the Waterford coast There's the bank and the ditch, just marked out there, and you can see there are hut sites on the recorded on the mainland and on one of the Sheep Island, one of the islets there. So it seems likely that this fort was all connected when it was inhabited 1,500 years ago or so. So we are losing, and we don't know how much we've lost so far. They're relatively under-researched promontory forts in Ireland. A lot of the work goes is with development. We had to ask permission from the farmers to reach all these sites and look at them. So they're not visited as much to be known about. They're away from the harbours and marinas where a lot of maritime work would go on. They are found internationally They are an international monument, which I think is significant. They're certainly recorded from the Shetlands all the way around Scotland, on both the east coast and the west coast, and then really around the north of Ireland and down around the south coast of Ireland over to Pembrokeshire and Wales, and then Cornwall. And then there's also some in the Channel Islands and Brittany. And then you're also found again over in northwest Spain. So they are significant. From roughly this Iron Age to early medieval period. They protrude into the sea. So if you're like sailing past, they're a very useful feature to navigate by, to see is there a safe place to shelter from a storm. And they're also they're part of the maritime landscape for people who actually live in them as well. They can look over the sea at the passing vessels, and they can look for the fish to be passing as well, and they can monitor the sea as well. So it's important for the coastal people as well as seafarers. So really the question we try to answer just in this kind of talk, to bring in the Cherish project, looking at the erosion. Have they been eroded away, or is there in some areas where you can see there's gaps to the east of England, and gaps in parts of east of Ireland and as well, and mid Wales, and or have they been eroded away in this area, or is there some kind of maritime link between these areas where they're concentrated? Such as between the Southern Ireland and Pembrokeshire. So with these kind of linked in some kind of maritime traditions. So we want to work out what is the extent of the erosion in these places. Where are they? So we need to see where they're concentrated. What were they actually used for? And importantly, when were they used? So we need to know if they are contemporary in these different areas around this coast. So, we'll put this research here, what's been done in the past. In Ireland, if you're looking at promontory forts, what Thomas Westrop, but just around the beginning of the 20th century, was certainly recorded many and sketched them, such as Dunbeg in the bottom right there. Gordon Child, famous for work at Skara Brae in Orkney, also excavated at Larry Bain. In the 1930s, we found relatively a rich site here, with iron working and shells and animal bone. O'Kelly worked in the Cork area around Towhead. He recorded several forts, most of them only finding shells from really the earlier period for artifacts, but one of them was rehabited a bit later on in the 16th, 17th century. One of the names there, Dooneen Dermot Moor, means little fort of Big Dermot. Whether Little Dermot had a big fort nearby, O'Kelly didn't say. So Terry Barry he worked at Trinity. He had excavated at Dunbeg in the 1970s after the erosion there, and so we got some dating evidence from Dunbeg, and then Wooding, and then there are people who looked at the maritime links and trying to develop, and certainly from the Mediterranean, on the Atlantic side with Wooding and Henderson, and to look at these, we get some Mediterranean and and French, well, Gaulish pottery from the early medieval period appearing around the Irish Sea. That's been, some might have been concentrated around probably forts like Dalkey Island outside Dublin and famously Tintagel. And a lot of my research itself is based on Christo Westerdale, how I look at the monuments along the coast with the landscape, where you see the changing seasons, or whether used for fishing. How did the people, the seafarers, view these places, and includes the information that we can get from place names of who lived here and what they were, maybe what the site was used for. So the Cherish project, we're using various methodologies. We have the aerial images. We're trying to get satellite images, as well. We're using drones. Mostly for this project, for this talk, that we certainly be concentrating more on what the coast edge information that we have gathered so far from the geophysics and the drone work, and try and interpret that. But we still have other work we like to do when we get back to do field work again, such as more laser scanning and even in the work of future offshore at wreck sites. So well, one of the first things we did in 2017 when the project started was to do some aerial surveys, and that was. You can see bottom left is the Welsh example of a promontory fort. You can see the banks and ditches. Again, and a couple of examples of forts in Waterford. You can see the banks and ditches here of Island Hubbock, and then some very narrow, thin areas. So one of the questions we want to answer is, well, nobody could have lived on this, but what purpose? Why did they cut this area off with a bank and ditch? Has it been eroded away? Is this a big, massive fort, or was there other things they wanted to do? Once we've decided from the aerial survey, we can then narrow down with our drone to concentrate on certain sites. In the Woodstown, Anstown area of Waterford on the Copper Coast, there's two examples on either side of promontory forts on either side of the beach. The Copper Coast is this area of southern Waterford that was there was a lot of mining. So it's been recorded at least since the Elizabethan times. But this is for lead, silver, and copper, of course. You can see the erosion cliffs. Here is our geosurveyor Rob flying a drone over Anstown Promontory Fort. There's the embankment. Our ditch is eroded out completely. There's some. If I zoom in, just there, zoom into Rob, and there's the drone. You can see some brickwork there. I did think it was originally part of a bank, but actually I think that's to do with a pit that's nearby. Probably for copper, and that's been added to. So there's a lot of mining in this Copper Coast area. It is an important mining area, and this could have certainly exacerbated the erosion in certain places. So the fort there at Woodstown. There you can see there's the banks and the ditches from the aerial view. You can see from the 19th century Ordnance Survey maps there, the banks and the ditches. Here's Anstown Beach. Here is Green Island, where you can see there's an arch through between the islands. This is where that arch was on the aerial view. This arch collapsed in the late 19th century. A new arch has appeared, and there's possible continuation of the banks over here. So as if this area has been eroded away, Westrop was recording at least 10 meters have been eroded away that he saw in this area. So that's about 80 meters between that bit there. That's possibly eroded away. And certainly from the drone, when we model the information from the drone for the heights, so on Green Island itself, here's the banks and the ditches. On Green Island, there is a hut site. We believe it's a possible hut site. So again, that would link our promontory fort to the island as much bigger fort, which is only it'll be over 250 meters long if we join these islets together, as it would have been 1,500 years ago. Just another example from the Copper Coast. This is where this is at Knockmahon. This is Stage Cove. The promontory fort is here. You can see the ditch. This has been mapped by the GSI on their survey, kind of linking their multi-beam data at sea with the data on the with the shallow data from the intertidal and the shallow marine, and where they couldn't get the boat in, so they've been flying drones to link that together. And here's the ditch of Knockmahan there, recorded from the aerial survey. So there is this is where the ore yard in the 19th century was taking the copper ore away. And here, there was certainly the boats coming in and out here, as you can see. And there's even there's a cut through the through the bedrock, which we can see at low tide for the boats to enter to take away the ore. So it shows that this was an important site for certainly in the 19th century, but that would have been earlier for the presence of the copper in the area, and you've got the Promontory fort in this area. But also that makes this fort even more important is the presence of the Ogham stone. And now Ogham is a 5th to 6th century Irish script. Those carvings into the corner of the rock form different letters. They would normally form the name of the local leader or an ancestor of the leader claiming his land. And two of these Ogham stones were found at this Knockmahan Promontory fort in one in the ditch when it was being ploughed. So it shows the importance of this site for someone who could who wanted to certainly claim the territory of their ancestors, and it's also you would need to know someone who could write as well at the time. And another review where we had an opportunity when we did manage to get out to do some survey work for Heritage Week. We joined up with the National Parks and Wildlife Service to actually see how would these promontory forts have looked like from the sea. We could record the erosion as well, but we also wanted to see how the seafarers would have seen them, how they would approach them when they were passing by, where would they have landed, were there resource areas where the fishing that could have been gone on these areas. So we did record each individual fort along the coast of the Copper Coast. There's approximately 32 in total, and about 26 kilometers of this coast. We were able to see the embankments. These have been eroded down over certainly almost 2,000 years, 1,500 years or so. They are more significant in some places than today, but where you can see whether the erosion is there. But certainly a boat approaching these forts would have been able to see them when they were a lot higher, and they would have had a palisade on top of the earthen embankment marking them out. So yeah, I'd like to try to put the evidence together on the dates that we have for promontory forts. When were they actually in use? It seems to be around the Wales kind of Cornwall area. They quite often find Roman material in them, such as in the rumps here at Cornwall and Porthy Row in Pembrokeshire. They've been traditionally dated to the Iron Age because of that. You compare that, probably the most famous promontory fort would be Tintagel in North Cornwall, and it's associated with the Arthurian legends. But it's also got there's Merlin's Cave or Sea Tunnel, which goes through the centre of the island just there. But it's also associated with lots of certainly early medieval pottery as well. So it was a significant site, certainly in the early medieval period. You compare that, look at the Irish sites now. One of our significant sites, certainly for finding the Roman material, is Dromana. It lies to the north of, to the north of Dublin. In there we have the Martello Tower, a Napoleonic tower built during, I suppose, the late 18th century. And so it shows the significance of the promontory itself for overlooking and defending the route past this fort. Metal detectors illegally have been finding Roman artifacts within this fort itself for the last during the 20th century, and that is it's quite a large fort, and so the metal detector they find is certainly coins and stirrups of horses from Roman times, and it certainly is quite a large fort. You see, it's 350 meters. That's relative. That's one of the biggest forts that we're certainly finding around compared to most other ones in Ireland. So it seems it's quite an unusual site itself. It seems to tie in with an island offshore Lambay, which also has similar age materials. That's looking out at the, you can see the bank and the ditch. Well, you can see the bank along there, marked down, looking out at the Martello Tower. That's looking the other way. But certainly, there's been some excavations recently looking at the 18th century Martello Tower, but with geophysics before, not by us, but by the Discovery Programme earlier, and an earlier project. Shows there are kind of hut sites and stuff, which perhaps from an earlier period, which do need to be investigated in some time. But one thing we don't know is about the banks and the ditches that make this a promontory fort. Were they built in the we haven't dated them themselves, the banks and the ditches themselves, to know that when this actually formed a fort. Because they could have the Roman would have been before the fort was built. When I kind of compare that to Dalkey Island, which is just to the south of Dublin Bay, and here's another Martello Tower. But there is in the corner, there's another ditch in the bank, so a much smaller promontory fort that we always thought Dromana. So here we are finding in the bank and the ditch, well, underneath the bank, you're getting late 6th century materials and pottery. So this kind of suggests they built this fort much later, even though they do have Roman finds on Dalkey as well. So it kind of dates the fort to the early medieval period. And that compares to other sites such as Larrabane on the north coast, which has pre-9th century materials. Again, Terry Barry found at Dunbeg. The hut site there that we saw over in Kerry, that was the 9th to 11th century AD. And there's also at Dunseverick, one of the capitals of Dalriado, linking at North Antrim there with Scotland. The Viking attacks are recorded there in the 9th century. So they were still inhabited. So I'm trying to say that here is a lot of the promontory forts in Ireland seem later than the what we're getting over in Britain. Here is looking out at the Dalkey Island, from Dalkey Island, from the promontory fort itself. And there's interestingly two landing places. The one on the left may be associated with building the Martello Tower at a later period, and maybe the landing place on the right. These are kind of beach clearings where they are artificially cleared shores. Certainly kayakers found a Roman coin just on the beach there when they arrived. So from that around the 4th century AD, but that would have been before the fort was built. So it's just saying, as a lot of the artifacts from bronze pins seem to suggest, the 6th century. That's what one of the just an example of a piece of pottery that we found when we were saying thank you to the rabbits there. That also helped, and that's a late Roman amphora sherd. So it's probably the beware, but it may come from the Mediterranean. Probably maybe around the 5th to 6th century. So I want now to move on to what kind of purpose these promontory forts would have been used for. We're going over to the west coast of Ireland here at an example at Ferreters, and just looking from this one, standing at one promontory fort, and we're looking over at another one now, and we can see in that area there's kind of terraces. When we look at it, we kind of see inscriptions within those terraces. It's not, you see that's inscribed by O'Shea, 1920. The local farmer said this was built in. Said there were fishermen used to fish off this area some time back, and they've handily dated with all the there's Lovett in 1893. Handily, it's got a cross on the top of this mound. That kind of reminds me. I would think that is possibly the summit of Mike Brandon. Brendan, the navigator, would be famous certainly from the 6th century. Was a person who sailed. who sailed along the coast. But so that ties up with the kind of fishing activities and the kind of holidaying that was happening in the 19th century. Late 19th and early 20th century, and using these promontory forts for fishing. And this kind of reuse of a site of that's always they've been there. They want to the forts are they there to control the fishing resources as part of their purpose. Here we have W. Donnelly from the Marines from July 1918, Royal Marines. Another example here, even from further afield, we have J. O'Sullivan from California. So with all the resources been talking about the fish and this, but there are other must be other reasons for the forts and owning them themselves to break them off. And here, because this is so narrow, is it because it's been eroded away? Is it this kind of finger of rock? But also, when you look at the place names like that's called Gull Island, and so. It does kind of when we kind of went to explore it and stuff, see that we didn't find any physical remains, but there's certainly lots of feathers and all the birds from all the gulls that are flying around. So it shows certainly in the 19th century there was some wildfowling what was going on and egg collecting. And what the birds that we were able to see today. But here we can another place even has a record. It's called the O'Hanrahan's Rock. It's beside another promontory fort on that Waterford coast. It's named O'Hanrahan because he was a wildfowler, and unfortunately he fell off and died. That was back in the 19th century. So okay, again. If we are in good agricultural areas, you have another purpose could be for and certainly when you have ring forts and raths, more inland sites, probably to keep cattle. And so there's no reason why, certainly in these larger forts, they weren't in cattle enclosures. Rinamo means point of the cow. That top right picture. An interesting story there from Raymond by Raymond Fitzgerald. He was part of the Norman invasion in the Norman invasion of Ireland in the 12th century. When he made encampments at a place called Dundonolf, which could be Bag and Bun there in County Wexford. This promontory fort is cut off. You can see there's a trench there and a trench there. And so when the Vikings from Waterford town joined up with the Irish to stop him invading, he had previously been cattle raiding. He held all the cows in the fort. So when the Vikings and the Irish approached, he opened the doors. He let the cows out, and that destroyed all the ranks of the Vikings and Irish, and he was able to capture Waterford city. So as we mentioned before about another resource around these promontory forts is the mining, and we've got around the Bunmahon area of the Waterford Copper Coast. So we can see from the 19th century, there's the UK Hydrographic Office view of the way to outside Knockmahon promontory fort. There's the Ore House, and there's the square area, and we see Cornish engine houses, even adits in the cliffs. So it's an important area for the copper and lead and the silver resource. One particular concentration is just around this town, the Templo Brick Ballinarid area. There's here we have Bunmahon Head, it's a promontory fort. We have Slippery Island, promontory fort here, Templo Brick. There was meant to be some buildings on that in the 19th century. It's eroded away now on that stack. But Templo Brick is Church of the O'Bricks. We have Launa Brick, Island of the O'Bricks, this stack here. And the O'Bricks, they were an important, very important family within the Deasy group who used to live in southern Waterford in the early medieval period and controlling this area. So we have Rinamo, the Point of the Cow, the two promontory forts there, and St. John's Island, there's another two promontory forts. So we have 8 promontory forts in this small area of coast with important lead and silver resources. There's the geologist Dunoyer's view of the Ilona Brick. It's called Danes Island. They had obviously didn't attribute this to Irish building, they attribute it to Viking, but it is originally earlier than Viking areas. There's the mine in the cliff that Denoyer drew, and we can just see the mine there today when we look at it. The erosion. So it looks like the mining has severely eroded, certainly in the 18th, 19th century, has severely exacerbated the erosion of this coast. So we're certainly recording around the Alona brick. There's the island here of the Alona brick, where the drone model that we would produce from all the photographs, just to see the heights and the lengths, and we can put together. So we're certainly getting to hut sites. Certainly, wildfowlers in the 19th century said there were hut sites on Alona brick, and we'll be able to probably trace a few, but we'll have to get mountaineering qualifications if we want to go onto the island in the future. You can sort of trace of an embankment that would have cut off this promontory from the land. Is possibly just there, and then it's probably eroded away in other areas. So well, it seems like an interesting site. We want to do the magnetometry. We couldn't obviously get onto Alona brick, but we would look at the surrounding fields, see if there's associated sites. Here's what the results look like when we overlay that over the drone image. We can see lots of very, very black areas. There's very, very positive results of this. We have to excavate to determine exactly what these are going to be, but they may be associated with smelting of the copper. They may be a mine itself that's been filled in, or pits. So we'd certainly like to go and see them. Interestingly, the farmer, the landowner said, this field here at Rinamo, towards where I just show you the circle there, that's called the Castle Field, and that it didn't seem to have any ploughing for some reason, but areas that seem to be avoided. But you can certainly see where as I concentrate, there's like a circle of pits, and a linear feature to the center, which may be a souterrain or so. So it would be interesting, or possible mine. And in this area, and it appears to be eroding off the cliff. So it seems to be disappearing. And this wasn't recorded on any early map. So it's certainly an area feature that we'd like to look at in the future. So we could see, we would think were these forts were they there to dominate the resources, but they can also such as the wildfowling, the fishing, but also to control the sea routes. Certainly an important site like the Alona bricks, these local leaders in this area and of the bricks. And so they were prestigious sites if they're high up, like a fort that's like the Alona bricks, like 50 meters high, and that can be seen 20 foot. Then you can probably see 25 kilometers to sea. So it's important if you're passing by in a boat for these navigational features. And so then they're so important, as we kind of mentioned before, that you get Napoleonic towers built on top. Or the Martello Tower. This happens to be a signal tower. There's 3 of them along the Copper Coast that you're no longer seeing today. There's the view in the bottom left where you can see the tower that's there in the UK Hydrographic Office image is no longer there today. There is a wall, a wall, that's all that's left when you walk up there. Interestingly, seems to be a way down this cliff, even though it's the highest cliffs that along the coast are around 80 meters. I should mention that they're promontory forts as well, that they've built the Napoleonic Tower on. And there's a way down the cliff here we can see as well with those being eroded. So there was access from the landing place as you approach these promontory forts as well. So they weren't like disassociated with the sea. One thing we kind of noticed when we were kind of traveling along the coast was how the old red sandstone shines out compared to the volcanic rocks, the andesites and the rhyolites that are just landward. But most of the mining seems to be in the andesite and the rhyolite, but the sort of the old red sandstone kind of does shine. And look, that one there is one of the forts, the Bunmahan Head. How it kind of appears. You compare that with what we see from the aerial images here we see the old red sandstone again and the cliffs, and then there's 2 promontory forts to the left and right of it there, and that's there was hut sites recorded on St. John's Island, so that was probably all one fort. The farmer himself was driving his tractor just about 40 years ago, and he said 10 meters of the cliff collapsed behind him. So if you even look on the old Google Earth images, you will see that cliff has been retreating over and being repaired more recently. And so it does show that this cliff was probably much more seaward than it is in the past, and perhaps even these promontory forts were connected that we see here today. And also just showing how important Ilona Brick was in the Dutch atlas from 17th century. It's even after the place was probably abandoned. One of the few places it mentions there between Tramore and Dungarvan along that Waterford coast is the Île Inaric, which is the island of the O'Bricks, as one of the only navigational features that when you're traveling on your atlas along the coast. So it does show us an important site for passing seafarers to recognize. Certainly from the Irish records, they record that they must look after people from the sea. There's probably to stop piracy, and so people aren't raiding other ones. So to traders, so then yeah, so the local leaders would have to guard the coast basically as part of their duties. There's also the kind of law of 9 ways ownership of goods that get washed up, and part of these laws. So you can count 9 ways from the shore that they would have owned, but also if you have a promontory, you're also protruding far more seaward, and therefore you can extend your ownership of goods. I'd also like to look at to bring in the different other as we this going back to Napoleonic times as well. We can start to get this more evidence of how the people saw the coast, and one of them comes in this sea shanty. With of sailors returning from the Napoleonic Wars in Spain, and part of the verses go they repeat of from Rouchan to Silius, 35 leagues. But when you get to verse 3, as they enter the English Channel, the first land we sighted was called the Dodman, and then next Rainhead off Plymouth. So I had to go visit these, and you can see the ditch of the Dodman here and in the bottom left, and then Rainhead is the very, very prominent promontory fort there with a later medieval chapel on the top. So it shows to show that these promontory forts are very important navigational features for sailors and seafarers. And yeah, this is the start point as well. Maybe I haven't been another promontory fort. I know it's got a lighthouse, but I haven't been. Maybe it is another promontory fort in the past. So there's a certain perception that they were disassociated with the sea, I kind of mentioned, but there is easily enough access down the cliffs. You can certainly see in Kerry around the Dunquin area and Dunbeg of be able to walk down the cliffs. There you can see some of the paths that have eroded away and along this coast, but there's only traces of them where people could have accessed. It's probably not the best for a wooden boat, unless you're just dropping off goods. But when you use the curragh, you can empty the goods. You can then lift it and carry it because it's only hide and a frame. A big example there at Dunquin from the records of they even made a beach clearing for it as well, and a way to go up the cliff of a curragh. And Dunbeg there at the top there is the certainly 19th century traditions of people walking down this cliff, and we've taken our drone image model, and you can see, because we're not allowed to walk down the cliff today, but it's the danger. But they did have traditions of keeping their curraghs at the bottom of the fort. So it just shows the fort was accessible for travellers along the coast as well. To try to just sum up more with this, we try to bring everything together with the spread of ideas, and there's similar kind of artifacts that could have been such Christianity would have spread from Britain to Ireland. There's all the place names that are named after saints around this coast and back through Wales and Cornwall. So ideas will always be going to be spreading during this Iron Age, later Iron Age medieval period. There's always the records of the slave and cattle raiding that goes on between the different groups in this area. If we zoom in, I kind of mentioned Ogham stones before, the early Irish script. And the kind of distribution certainly is very familiar to people in, well, to looking at the distribution of promontory forts over from Kerry and Cork along the Waterford area to the Pembrokeshire and even down into Cornwall as well, and linking up these areas. And there are other artifacts, certainly from the trade that we mentioned with the pottery, and the concentrations you can see with the larger areas around Tintagel and Dalkey Island of 5th to 6th century Mediterranean pottery, and this similar pottery from Gaul came from the around the in the 7th century. Seems to be this kind of area of Irish Sea, Celtic Sea area. So it ties all these areas of the promontory forts together. With the trade route, so I don't think it's not necessarily just erosion on certain areas, but it seems to be all very familiar areas that we're finding the same kind of artifacts as if these places are linked by maritime links and maritime groups. And yeah, so just a couple of examples. It's a bit with the souterrain there at Tintagel, a possible leak. So it ties to these are places where saints were buried. You have them quite common on the Dingle Peninsula, and yeah, we have the Ogham stones there, also in Cornwall within the churchyards. And then for an example of over in Ireland on the Waterford side, Donabratton, on the coast there. Donabratton means Fort of the Britons. So there's obviously there's back and forth between the two areas. That's perhaps recorded in these place names. So just to basically say what we plan to do with the future, when we are able to get back to do more field work, would be to continue to monitor the erosion, after storms. And as regularly as possible. We certainly like to. We weren't able to do our excavations that we planned in Pembrokeshire, the promontory forts, Pembrokeshire and Kerry, for this year. But we hope at some point to be able to do that next year. So yeah, one of the probably be slightly more cost effective if we need to do lots of forts is to certainly look at rope access to record the ditches and the banks, as what the Welsh part of Cherish did at Dinnesdinal. To get the thermoluminescence dates, so then we can start dating these forts more. So we have better dates than we just rely on the artifacts itself. So we have two types of data that we know so far. So thank you everyone for listening.